Hello, welcome. We're live now and you can hear us talking. I'm Lisa with the Bioscience Center, and we're here with our monthly series. Today's topic is insurance for small businesses. We have Heather Johnson with New Mexico Bank and Trust, who is our trusted teacher, and we've talked about carrying this on into 2018, and we have some ideas for some new topics maybe, right?
Awesome. Right, and maybe a little bit more in depth, so if anybody who's online would like to provide comments as to what they'd like to see for next year, I think that would be great.
Yeah, great. So we believe it's much better to be here in person, because then you get your questions about your own company answered, but we welcome all of you who are following us live on Facebook as well. So next month's topic is going to be taxes, which I'm sure is a very popular subject and lots of us need to know, but insurance is important as well. So I'll let Heather kick it off.
Thank you, Lisa. So today's topic of insurance. Insurance, like everything else. Hi, come on in.
Hi.
Go ahead and have a seat. Let me get you a... Lisa, could you grab a... I have to go downstairs and look.
Welcome.
Good morning.
Good morning.
I'm Heather with New Mexico Bank and Trust. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Oh, my name is Jenny, and I own a small eBay store. I sell antique furniture or vintage furniture.
Oh, cool.
We've met. I think you've been to 1 Million Cups before.
Yes. Well, perhaps.
And here as well?
No.
No?
This is my first time
Okay,
here.
good.
I got lost.
Oh.
Oh.
Well, welcome. Thanks for joining us.
This is Kimberly. She's the marrying minister.
Hi.
Hi, nice to meet you.
And we were just getting started. So, insurance for small business is just like everything else. Nothing's quite cookie cutter. When I started my career in banking, I started with the consumer side, which is when you walk into the branch and open up a checking account. And getting a loan in a checking account for a consumer is a little bit more straightforward. When I didn't realize when I moved over to business banking how not straightforward things were and how much every business is different. And insurance, I think, also continues to sort of reflect that, because the insurance policy for my business is going to be very different from the insurance policy from Lisa's business. So just like anything else, it's important to look around, talk to various professionals to make sure you're getting the right coverage. And last month we talked about risk assessment, and so really to think about those risks and what you need covered so that you get the right insurance for you. So we'll talk about some sort of basic ideas today, but again, each business is a little bit different and the requirements are different, and we'll talk about that too. So we'll be identifying the types of insurance that are required. There's some state laws that require us to keep certain insurances for our business. There's some federal laws. Identifying other types of insurance that you might want to consider or think about that maybe you weren't aware existed. And then explaining why insurance is so important. And just basically it helps keep your business afloat when something bad happens. So, what do you want to learn? We're gonna do the quick pre-test that's in your pamphlet, and then maybe if you would share something that you don't know about insurance or would like to know after you do the pre-test.
In my case, liability insurance, because I have customers coming or freight companies coming to pick up the furniture from my place, and I have an entrance. I had a gate. I just had a drunk driver to cover the wall, the gate, and everything.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
Hopefully you had insurance.
There's a question mark there. But they're taking responsibility about everything. But liability is my question.
Okay.
When people come and look at the pieces, I'm open by appointment only. So I don't have like traffic like a regular retail shop.
But you still need to have, are you at a home or?
It's a commercial property,
Okay.
but it looks like a home from the outside. Pretty tricky.
We'll talk a little bit about, too, when you're renting versus a home business, that kind of thing. So, Kimberly, is there anything in particular you're curious about?
Not in particular, but I was raised by State Farm.
Mm-hmm.
So auto and life I'm not at all interested in because I heard it all my life. But for the business and my legal background, I really want to be insured properly.
Mm-hmm.
You can't possibly think of everything that could possibly happen. I'm sure you never thought that could happen. And that's when stuff happens. So one of my main concerns with doing pop-up weddings is when I'm out with a couple, how can I be paid
Mm-hmm.
and be safe?
Mm-hmm.
Not that that might have anything to do with insurance, but maybe I need insurance to cover being hit on the head and ripped off. I don't
Right.
know.
Mm-hmm.
You know, any scenario could come up. And not that I've heard any horror stories about an officiant being in trouble with a couple that they married and having lawsuits or anything, but maybe someone that knows all the ins and outs of insurance might know stuff that can help me
Right.
be
Think
above
about
that.
those things. Yeah. And that's the key, is talking to a professional who knows or has seen different things. So there are 6 key areas insurance your business may require, other types to consider, reasons for insurance, location-related considerations. These are primarily things like flood and earthquake. If you live in Hawaii, maybe volcano insurance. Selecting a policy, agency, and agent, and what to do after you purchase it. So these are some of the things we'll be talking about today. So the first one, what's required? There is in New Mexico an insurance representative at the state through the PRC, I believe, and you can check their website to look for different requirements. There's also, potentially depending on the size of your business, with the recent healthcare, you might be required to provide those benefits to your employees. And if you have a car that you use for business purposes, you want to make sure that that's covered as well in connection with the business. Even if you're using it for personal and it's a joint car, it should have business insurance on it, right? So there's a lot of times there's minimums too that states require that you have. So check for that and just make sure that those types of things are covered. You might want to just think about again, what the risks to your particular business are before you contact somebody, so then maybe you can have a list of questions ready. Other insurance, other liability insurance. So there's different kinds. There's professional liability, which protects people like insurance brokers, mortgage lenders. This covers things like malpractice, errors, negligence when you're providing services to a customer. So if you're somebody who's in the personal, a bookkeeper, when you're providing a service, you might want to look into professional liability insurance to cover those types of things, so that they can't come after, so that if they sue, these are the things that you're protecting against. There's general liability, which protects your business in the event of the claim. So it might not be mandatory, but most businesses have some type of liability insurance. And this is what you would want to cover in the event somebody comes to your store or shop and is injured on the way in.
Well, I had an example. Well, this guy parked, thank God, on the outside my gate, but he was loading the furniture and it kind of dropped on him. And he got hurt, you know, everything, but it was outside of my property. Usually I was thinking, oh my God, if it's in my driveway, will I be liable for it?
You know, I would ask your insurance broker. That's a pretty specific question. There's a potential you might be. And so, and I don't know what the specifics around that are.
Because that would be like a slip and fall inside of
Mhm.
the building, which potentially you would be responsible for.
And if you're renting too, you would want to know what type of insurance the building has, because they could potentially go after you and the person who owns the building. And so they also should have insurance coverage as well.
Okay.
So that's something to consider too, because the owner of the building might have. This is one that's probably not mandatory, but Lisa brought it up, directors and officers policy.
Oh, yeah, you mentioned that a month or two ago. I forgot about that.
Just had to buy it. It's very expensive.
Okay.
It protects her shareholders in the event potentially there's some sort of mismanagement of accounts or some type of fraud or something of that nature. And so as a director and owner, there's protection for them in the event that she's mishandling.
But doesn't that fall into shareholders' risks? I mean,
You're right, but there's also insurance too that helps protect and cover in the event that that happens.
so you had to get that for your software company?
Yes, because we're a C Corp and we have a board of directors.
Okay.
And to protect our board of directors, we had to get D&O insurance.
And I think Nick spoke on that the last time it was brought up,
Yeah?
because he's on the board and he said something about he wouldn't take a seat on the board because they didn't have proper insurance.
Right.
Mhm.
Okay. Okay. So I need to look into that more, just so I understand that one aspect.
I don't think you'll need to have a board of directors for your
Mhm.
company.
But curiosity.
Yeah, well, of course.
Kind of yeah,
So that's
it's
good.
all, yeah, it's all
You
the
like that about
stuff
you.
in place for my mind.
You like that about you.
As always, laws change, so it's always good to keep up to date and to keep in contact. Typically, insurance is good for a year when it's issued, and so, you know, have an actual conversation with your insurance agent at the end of the year. Don't just renew the policy, but your business has probably changed over that year, and make sure that everything's covered. So there are some work-specific insurances. Doctors, that's always the famous one, right? Malpractice insurance. CPAs are liable for a specific work they conduct on behalf of others. There's restaurants, which have food business, so they have liability against foodborne illnesses. Construction companies, another big one. General contractors liability. Auto repair shops have business general liability. Can anybody think of maybe some other professions that might have some sort of specific insurance attached to it?
I actually had to stop my business because I was trying to start a horse boarding business,
Mm-hmm.
and the insurance was ridiculous. I mean, I couldn't even make a profit. I mean, just to board something like 10 horses for a year, it was like $5,000 a year in insurance.
Wow.
So I just stopped it.
Mm-hmm.
But that could be a reason why some people are getting out of the horse business, because the liability is just outrageous on those animals.
So what type of insurance did you have to cover?
I guess it was sort of like a liability. And they said, have you ever been around horses that are little? They said, do you know much about them? And I said, well, you know, they could step on a foot or whatever, and that's what they were concerned about, that if the horse stepped on a person, they would sue me. But we were going to lease out, you know, the perimeters for the horses, and they were more worried about the liability.
Mm-hmm.
I said, no, I'm not but I'm not going to start that business.
Mm-hmm. I know a friend of mine looked into a daycare, and that also has very specific insurance needs. And again, it was very cost prohibitive. She wanted to rent it out of her house, a home daycare center, and it just didn't make sense because of the insurance. So that's another one that child care that has very specific insurance needs.
And you can go up the age limit to the old folks in a
Mhm.
care home.
Yep.
And you're gonna have to be insured at the wazoo to be having
Mhm.
people.
Engineers, draftsmen also have errors and omission. Lenders, underwriters have errors and omission insurance. Freight carriers, a lot of automobile insurance, liability if they get in an accident. So those are some things to think about.
The airlines,
The airlines. Mm-hmm.
yeah.
So there's required insurance for employers. The first one that's most prevalent is workers' compensation insurance. This is a state law. Could be a federal law, but I know the state monitors whether or not you have workman's comp. If you have employees, you need to have it. What does it do? So if a
3 or more employees?
there are. So thank you, Lisa. You bring up a good point. If you all of the laws are typically structured around the size of your business. So that's why it's important to check how many employees, and it's also number of hours too. So if you have a whole bunch of part-time or seasonal employees, it might not qualify you for the size of business.
If you use contractors, like people that work for you by the hour, do you
Doesn't count.
Yeah. So workers' compensation insurance protects against illnesses and injuries at work. So if somebody were to drop a large package on their foot while they're at work, that would be a workers' compensation. It pays for the rehabilitation and training of the employee. It addresses if there's payments to the beneficiaries if somebody were to die on a workplace accident. Medical payout, it is required by most states. So check New Mexico again, number of employees, number of hours worked, all of those types of things. And in our case, it's private. It can be either privately or state administered. So just this is one that everybody has to have. Cost of doing business. Another one is unemployment insurance. All businesses, again, depending on the size, but have to file pay unemployment insurance for their employees. The federal laws regulate the unemployment insurance, but state agencies administer the program. So it's through Workforce Solutions, through the state that administers New Mexico unemployment. So businesses with employees are required to pay these unemployment insurance taxes under certain conditions. And don't think you can avoid it, because if you decide not to pay, there are penalties and actions which could include a misdemeanor or felony. So it's important to make sure that if you do have employees that you're paying it and not. So, and then another one that potentially could be required is disability insurance for your employees. If wage replacement insurance to cover for eligible employees for non-work related sickness or injury. The biggest one I can think of a lot of times is maternity leave. That falls under short-term disability or cancer, things like that, that might cause a short-term disability situation. And there are states that do require it. A lot of employers just provide it as a benefit. So other types of insurance to consider that might not be required, but property insurance. If your building is hit by a DWI, commercial, natural disaster, and theft. So if there was a flood or an earthquake, you want to make sure you're covered. And not all policies have flood insurance, not all home policies have flood insurance, so it's important to consider. And theft, what does that look like for your particular business? And then you start getting into things like deductibles, whereas are you just going to eat the theft because it's under $500? You know, like you being out there, is it worth it to pay the claim because it's under the deductible anyway? So if you were to get a deductible, how low would it need to be for you actually to be covered for the marriage?
Lots of questions.
Lots of questions.
Mhm.
Equipment, is your equipment covered? If you're, again, vehicle is always the most popular, but perhaps with horses you have some other equipment, maybe a hay baler or something of that nature. That might be something that you need to think about for insurance. Inventory. What if something were to happen where your building was flooded because the sprinkler system decided to break overnight? You come in the next morning and all of your inventory is gone. So
I have a question. With
Yeah.
inventory, I don't know if you know the answer, but do they pay you for the cost or for what you're gonna be selling it for?
I think that depends on your insurance policy.
Oh, really?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
I imagine it would be cost of replacement, but
And then you could get business income where it would cover the cost of the loss of income, which is a separate policy.
Okay.
So most policies have a general all risk policy, which covers a wide range of incidents and perils. But again, if there's something specific about your business, that can add on to sort of your broad-based. So it's important to know what's covered in just your general insurance policy, and then to know if there's something specific you want to make sure is covered, you might have to add on from that. Other types of insurance to cover the loss of income. So I think about, there was a business next to my house where for a fluke reason the power went out in that particular commercial building for 3 days. That's a big loss of income. So, and clearly nothing anybody was planning for. But if they had had loss of income insurance, they might have been replaced from those 3 days. Life insurance. This one is important if you are potentially the only person running your business and there are significant others, perhaps children or a spouse or somebody who's relying on your income from the business. This is important to have. If your business has a lot of debt, where if you were to die, then all of a sudden your significant other would have to pay that debt, this is important to consider. Sometimes it's required by lenders. If you are the only one running your business and you take out a loan, they might say, you know what, you need to get a life insurance policy to make sure we're made whole if you pass away. SBA, it's one of the big requirements that the SBA has is key man life insurance. And it might not be just you. It could be if there are two of you that are key in the business, that if both of you, something were to happen, you might have to have a policy on you and a policy on the other key man. Perhaps it's the CFO, perhaps it's the president. It just depends. If you're a contractor, it might be the person who goes out and does the bidding that helps make all the money for the company. So key man doesn't necessarily mean just president, but it's something to consider. Who's important in your business if you were to lose them because of death, that it would be hard for your business to continue to go on. Same thing with disability or medical. If you were suddenly to have a large medical cancer or something else hit you that you weren't able to work your business, who would pay that debt that you have out there, or who would pay for your living expenses? So these are things to consider when you're thinking about owning your own business. And the people who rely on you. This is really more for the people who rely on you. So, review examples of required business insurance. Is your business required by law to carry any of these types of insurance? Liability, workers' compensation, unemployment, disability. Should it carry it anyways?
yes.
I would think you'd want to be prepared for as much as possible, so carry every option that you can afford to, but having that talk with the broker to know what you are more than likely going to need.
Right, and you gotta keep sort of that risk of it happening versus cost in mind. I mean, there's a whole lot of insurance policies out there you can get, but is it cost prohibitive and does it make sense? So really asking that question of what are really the chances that this would happen, if it did happen, how much is it going to affect my cash flow? Is it something that's seriously going to cause my cash flow to be negative? And if so, then it might be well worth it. If it's something where, okay, it's going to be ugly for a little bit of time, but I know I can make it through, maybe you don't want to pay for it. Because you can pay a lot and not be making money, but you want enough that you're covered. And so knowing your business is important just as much as talking with somebody else so that you're not over-covered.
I haven't found a good broker yet.
Well, for wedding insurance, I've looked online and they won't talk to you unless you give them all your information, which I haven't done yet because I'm not there yet. So I don't know anything yet, but I will.
So you can go to a big company like Hub here in town and find a broker.
What is that, Hub?
Hub International. Every single insurance person that insurance broker, local insurance broker that I have worked with to try to stay away from the bigger companies has sold to Hub. So I find a broker that I really like, and I feel like I'm supporting a local small business or a local small insurance company, and then they sell to Hub. So Hub's pretty much where all the people I've ever worked with are at now.
I never heard of it.
And they're just within the state, right?
You know, they could be expanding outside of the state of New Mexico, but
Okay.
they're big here in Albuquerque.
Thank you. That helps.
And something to consider, I mean, good or bad, you know, when you talk with one agent, they might only deal with one particular insurance company. But, you know, maybe if you can find somebody who deals with multiple or, no, you know, I mean, those are different things to consider too. So we talked about this a little bit, but we'll go a little bit more in detail. So lender or investor required insurance. If you are borrowing money from a bank, they're going to require that you have the correct insurance on your property. If it could be the building or the property, it could be the contents inside the property. It depends a lot on what you're putting up for collateral. So if you were putting up your building as collateral or you're purchasing a building, the bank wants to know that there's insurance. They're going to require proof of it, and they're going to require that there's enough of it to cover the loan should something happen. And they're going to put on it a loss payee to the bank, which means if the building goes up in flames, that they will receive some of that money because of the loan they have against the building. So you might not think it ever happens to you, but somebody was there was the big court case where the gentleman decided to burn down 9 different buildings in Albuquerque. One of them was under construction, so yeah.
That was last Christmas, wasn't it?
Yeah. So that's
Yeah.
the banks who have the loan on those buildings want to make sure that they will be made whole. Perhaps if it's a cash flow loan, they want to make sure you have insurance to provide if there's interruptions, reconstruction, repairs, those types of things. And we talked about in the event of the owner's disability or death, who's going to pay the bank back or the government, depending on who has the loan, in the event something happens. So those are all required insurances. So the key person policy. Do you have a list of names who could run your business or that you trust if you were ill or out for an extended period of time? So then you are a key person. And I strongly encourage you to think about who that person would be that if you were out for a long period of time would step in to run your business so that you don't have to close it. You know, start training somebody. Who would take over your business in the event of a death? Is there a close one, a loved one, a friend, a family member who would step in and consider, I mean, my husband runs our business. If he were to pass away, I have a full-time job. Am I going to have to give up that full-time job? Right now we're working off of 2 incomes. What would happen to the business and would I need to decide to start running that? I mean, those are things I think about in regards to my business. What would happen to our child? You know, should I keep the business? Should I sell the business? I mean, what is that plan? And it's not fun to think about, but it's an important discussion that needs to happen. And perhaps insurance is the answer to that. Perhaps it's an employee, a key employee that you have that you think eventually I want to sell the business to. And so, or they will take over the business if something were to happen. And do you have life insurance to cover all the liabilities? Do you have enough insurance that way you're not leaving a bunch of debt behind you? So what's a surety bond? Surety bond. A surety bond is issued by a third party known as surety. It guarantees the second party will fulfill its obligations or meet certain laws. If the second party fails to do this, the bond covers the damages. So this is required a lot in construction, where I'm going to get a bond that says if you don't complete the work, then the bond's going to pay me. So then what the insurance company does is they go out and inspect the construction company, make sure they're doing everything that they want to do, and that they're willing to issue a bond in the event they don't complete the work. It's a pretty specific thing. It could be something, if you were wanting to do a contracting business, that you need to make sure you're able to fulfill the requirements of being able to be bonded. And a lot of times government work requires that you have some type of bond that protects them in the event something happens. So why is it important to have insurance? So you can sleep at night. I say it jokingly, but seriously, it's true. So it manages the risks involved in having a business, because as a business owner, you have a hard enough time sleeping as it is. It protects your assets, what you've already put into it. You've already put in probably a lot of equity, either sweat or cash, into the business that you don't want to give up in the event something happens. It protects you from loss of income so you can continue to have cash flow after whatever the incident is. It's important to maintain so you can continue your financing, and it protects from injuries and damages related to your business. So those are all things. Purchased required insurance and paying the premiums will keep your business running, while failure to comply with state and federal and county and local regulations can have damaging repercussions, potentially to your reputation and to the cash flow of your business if you have to pay fines or penalties or felonies. Nobody likes to think about disasters, system crashes, electronic downtime, but if it's something that's a big enough incident where, you mentioned you're with eBay, what happens if your router goes out for 3 days or you're not able to connect to the internet? Yeah. So what's the backup plan for that in case that happens? Your phone? So thinking about those risks and then how to mitigate them. So this goes a lot hand in hand with what we covered last month. Business continuity, insurance can be a key part of that. We talked about if there was a flood, your business should have, or you get the flu, what is your business continuity plan in the event that your business can't run? And protection from errors. People make mistakes, but you want some sort of protection for that.
My mind always goes to the human element, not so much the Mother Nature aspect of things.
Mm-hmm.
But that's what I dealt with. It's
Right.
humans and what they do.
So, where is your business? If you are a home-based business, just because you have a homeowner's policy, it might not cover you for your business activities. So, you need to talk with your insurance broker to make sure that they're aware that you're running a business out of your home and discuss what type of insurance you would need. I don't know if it's an add-on to your homeowner's policy that you need a separate rider or you need a whole separate plan. But if you have a business activity that happens at your house, you need to be aware it might not be covered. It's in big, bold, in a box in the middle. If you have more locations, so if you have a retail store, one or more locations, inventory theft, if your business is broken into, credit card theft, businesses that accept credit cards, I mean, that's always a big one we hear in the news. TJ Maxx, Experian, data, all of those types of things. Personal vehicles for deliveries, any of those could affect. Commercial, greater coverage than retail for large businesses if you have a big commercial property that you're financing or running. Even if you're a vendor that manages at kiosks and festivals, what if your display was to fall over and hit somebody? Do you have insurance to cover that? How do you protect yourself if you go to a conference? For maybe you're doing it either full-time or maybe even just short-time. I mean, you sort of hate that one weekend you decide to go work an event, something happens and you're not covered.
So that's an extra policy that you have to have?
It depends, but it's something to ask about.
It
Maybe.
can just be a clause and they charge you more money to add something into your whole policy.
And it could be covered under your whole policy, but to ask. And maybe if that's your whole business is just doing kiosks,
I
then
never
maybe you
thought of
don't
that.
need other things to cover you, like full liability for your inventory and things like that. You just need insurance to cover you while you're at events.
Like if I do a wedding fair and I get one of those, well, Fat Pipe has a bunch of those banners that come up and down, because
Yeah.
I've seen one in particular that I kind of like. But I never thought somebody would fall over it and sue me. But there you go, there's another thing, another lawsuit. Yeah.
So, selecting a policy, like I mentioned, weigh the costs to the insurance risk. I mean, if it's a small banner and it falls on somebody, how much damage is it really going to cost, and do you need to get a separate insurance policy for it? If you have a big cement castle that you're taking out to do fairs, or one of those jumpy house things that you do for birthday parties, and that's something that is a lot more important that you make sure you have the insurance for. Could you pay it out of pocket? The term self-insurance. If somebody were to get hurt or something happened, could you just pay the cost out of pocket? Because if you can, then maybe you don't need the insurance policy for it. Consider policy costs with deductibles. Again, if your loss is $200 because of theft and your deductible is $5,000, what's the cost versus everything else, and coverage limits. And is it sufficient for your business? Everybody's coverage is going to be different, what you need for your business. And does it provide for growth, especially in a year where maybe you're thinking you're going to ramp up from 5 employees to 20 employees, and that's your plan? You want to make sure you have enough insurance to cover you. And are there time constraints on modifying the coverage? Talk with your broker about adding riders. Can you do that? Or once you purchase your policy, is that it for the year? What does that look like?
I have a question. So every time that you make a claim,
Mhm.
right, does it increase your insurance?
That's always what they say, yes.
Just like having a car accident until you finally get your license taken away.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. They can quit insuring you.
No, really.
Oh, yeah.
So, select a company and agent. We kind of talked about it. Compare quotes, coverages, deductibles, shop around. Is this person stable? Have they been with the company for a long time? Are they easy to call or contact, or do they have somebody that they work with that you can always reach? Check consumer business reviews, network with others, and know what's not covered. Make sure you don't just assume, well, I bought the basic plan, so it's going to cover flood. It might not.
Yeah. Even terrorist activity.
Yeah.
We learned yesterday is an extra thing you have to tack on if for some reason you want to try to get covered after a terrorist attack.
or an active shooter or something?
Yep, they don't cover that anymore after 9/11 because there were too many claims.
Wow. That's a scary thing to have to talk to your insurance people about.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so now you bought your policy. What do? You stick it in a drawer and forget about it? At least remember the drawer you stuck it in. So you need to keep it where it's accessible. I mean, maybe you need to put it in your top drawer, but you need to be able to get to it and get to it regularly. You should keep key phone numbers around, and most importantly, you should provide them to your employees. So if something happens when you're not there, they know who to call and what to do. Maintain insurance-related procedures in your business continuity plan. So as you create your business continuity plan, put all those numbers in there so it's another place that you have it. And like I said, always review your policies. Make sure that your coverage is what you want it to be. If you hear about maybe the business next to you had something happen and you're like, I never thought of that, call up your insurance agent and be like, hey, am I covered on this? Or what happens if this happens, and how can I mitigate that? And just like anybody else, you should meet with your agent from time to time. There's new policies learning that terrorist attacks are no longer covered under a general policy. That's something that they might be able to tell you, give you provided information about. So,
So you want to start a new relationship with an insurance person, professional, and keep that relationship going. The way the men in my family had to do that with customers for life insurance. They became lifelong friends and blah, blah, blah.
It's a trusted advisor, just like an attorney or your banker. It's a trusted advisor position. And hopefully you can find somebody to fulfill that role.
Yeah.
And even if it's, okay, so some things to consider too is that if a bank requires that you have key man life insurance and you pay off the debt, you need to continue to keep the insurance going. The bank's not requiring it anymore. You paid them off, but you still might want it. So, or maybe you're like, you know what, I paid off the loan, I'm good, I don't need key man life insurance, then maybe you can cancel the policy. So rather than continuing to pay for something you no longer need. So remembering those types of things too.
And if you tuck your policy away and forget about it and go on about business and you're busy, you may be spending money that you don't have to anymore.
That's why it's always good. Yep.
Okay, so keep that up.
So, handle your credit responsibly. Insurance premiums are often based upon your personal credit score, so that's something to consider. If you choose to end your policy, frequently you can get a credit or a refund they'll insure you up until the date. And then if you've already prepaid for the next month, you might be able to get a refund. And then if you're unhappy or you feel something hasn't happened, there are places you can file a complaint, like with the state insurance department or commissioner, if you truly feel that they were not doing their job. So assuming risk is a part of the cost of doing business. Going outside's a risk, but so is staying inside. You can get hurt in your house just as much as you can get hurt outside. You might need boots, coat, or an umbrella for protection, but staying inside could result in a missed opportunity of doing something fun. So just because it's scary and insurance is scary doesn't mean you shouldn't have a business. So focus on your business growth, but always make sure you have something to protect you for those what ifs. So some key points for today. Check what is required in the state of New Mexico, federal laws, check the number of employees that are required, paying for unemployment insurance and worker compensation premiums on time, so that you don't get into any trouble, accidental or otherwise. Professional licensing could require an additional insurance or bond, and lenders or investors might require insurance protection against your going out of business. Insurance minimizes the impact risk can have on your ability. It minimizes it. It doesn't eliminate it. Nothing eliminates everything, but it helps minimize it. It impacts continued financing. It helps you retain employees. If you offer health insurance, it can help provide extra benefits and provides protection from liabilities. Your particular location, facilities, equipment, etc., is really what determines what your insurance needs are. So nothing's the same. You should kind of think about the risk for your particular business so that you can come to the table when you meet with the insurance agent rather than just having them assume they know your business and what you need. Keep accurate records for claims. It's really hard to claim loss of business income if you don't know what your income could have potentially been during that period of time because your records aren't clean. So going back to that bookkeeping and record keeping, they need to know that the information that they're receiving is good. Keep emergency contact information in accessible places and always update your beneficiaries. Life changes, people change, they come in and out of your life, but make sure that who is the beneficiary is the person you want it to be. So, does anybody have any last minute questions? I know I can't cover a lot of specifics about specific insurance policies, but I hope I answered sort of the broader questions about things to think about.
Well, it wised me up in as much as I really need to consider what's going to happen for each wedding, each couple, and gather my questions before I just get on the phone to some wedding business insurance provider.
Right.
I need to know more because from what I can tell so far online, they're all along the East Coast. They don't even know about New Mexico and what differences are here or whatever.
Right.
And I haven't had any in SoCal, so.
I think if you can come up with sort of the 5 major risk factors that you really consider for your business before you go to your insurance agent so that you can ask them, are these 5 things covered? These will be the biggest loss to my business, and how can we make sure that that's provided? And then they'll have things too that they will have seen other businesses that they can bring to the table and say, oh, well, you know what, this competitor, I saw this happen. Have you considered this? So, but if you can also, that way you know for sure that you're covered. If you guys would be willing to provide some feedback and included in that maybe things as we get closer to next year, what you would hope that would look like for these types of trainings, I would appreciate it. We're done.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.